It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was a time when everything was right in America. And whether you were a liberal or a conservative, it was a time when everything went terribly wrong. Whether you were for dropping bombs or dropping out, the 1960s still reverberate powerfully in American politics, and every president since Ronald Reagan has tried to exploit that fact. Even to this day, the winners and the losers. Now, for the first time, there's a clear-eyed look at the use of the 60s as a political issue, a take on the decade no historian has offered before. Introducing Framing the 60s, the use and abuse of a decade, from Ronald Reagan to George W. Bush. A groundbreaking new analysis by historian Bernard von Bothmer. As an historian and professor, von Bothmer was struck by the passions this decade evokes across the political spectrum. He thought it was important to show how politicians and presidents, sometimes very deftly, exploited our passionate beliefs about what kind of America the 60s left us. Framing the 60s offers historians a wealth of new primary source material. James Baker, Bob Woodward, Bill Bradley, Caspar Weinberger, Robert Bork, Arthur Schlesinger, plus many of the key advisors, speechwriters, and cabinet members of every president since 1980. More than 120 people, liberals and conservatives. They all sat down to talk for the record and to set the record straight. 40 years later, these issues are still not resolved. They remain just as charged, just as controversial. Are you ready for the real story about why we're still arguing about the 1960s? You'll find the answers here in Framing the 60s, the use and abuse of a decade, from Ronald Reagan to George W. Bush.